Part 4 consists of 2 tasks. You will hear 5 short extracts in which students talk about the people who have inspired them. Look at Task 1. For questions 21 to 25, choose from the list A to H why the speaker looks up to that particular individual. Now look at Task 2. For questions 26 to 30, choose from the list A to H how that person has affected the speaker. You will hear the recording twice. While you listen, you must complete both tasks. You now have 45 seconds in which to look at Part 4.
Đó, người ta cho tới 45 giây để đọc. Tuy vậy chúng ta đã dành 20 giây cho cái phần 1 rồi. Tại cái phần 2 chúng ta phải kiểm tra xem người ta hỏi gì. How that person has affected the speaker. Kiểm tra xem cái người mà sinh viên đang mô tả ảnh hưởng thế nào đến diễn giả, đã ảnh hưởng thế nào, đúng không? Rồi hãy lướt đi trong danh sách này.
Speaker 1.
When my husband was diagnosed with Parkinson's a few years ago, I was devastated. I couldn't face the fact that we would possibly not grow old together. Then I saw the actor Michael J. Fox on TV. He's younger than my husband and has had to live with the same debilitating disease for many years now. What impressed me was his unwavering optimism and determination not to let it take over his life. I cried a lot that day, but it was for the last time. I knew in my heart we had to make the most of the days we have together and celebrate all the good things about our life, rather than mourn a future loss.
Speaker 2.
Living in the inner city when I was 17, I was hanging out with the wrong crowd and had fallen into seriously bad habits. My dad would have none of it, and when he saw I wasn't going to straighten up, he packed me off to my uncle who owned a farm in the north. During the first few weeks, I had the worst time of my life, and I would have managed to run away if he hadn't proved far cleverer than I was. With time, I came to respect him for being the most genuine, caring, kind person I'd ever met. He taught me to respect myself and nature and how to live in harmony with it. Honestly, but for him, I might not be standing in front of you now.
Speaker 3.
From what I once read in an article, we usually put our parents up on a pedestal when we're kids, only to bring them crashing down as teenagers. But for me, that was never the case. We lost my dad when I was 2, and my mum had to raise us, that is, my 2 brothers, 2 sisters, and myself, all on her own. She was the most hard-working person I've ever known, a strong, unbreakable spirit, never complaining, never indulging in self-pity. I grew up to be a fighter, as independent and responsible as she was. I just hope I'm able to teach my kids a fraction of what she taught me.
Speaker 4.
It might sound corny, as, especially when she first became a success, the rags to riches story of J.K. Rowling was sprawled all over the papers and magazines. But for me, it's not just that. Don't get me wrong, I do admire how she rose from being a destitute single mother who had to resort to writing her novel in cafes because she couldn't afford heating her flat, to being one of the most celebrated novelists of our time. But what I find absolutely fascinating is how she persisted after countless agents and publishers turned down her work. She's a person who really believed in herself and her talent, and I hope that I can be the same when it comes to dealing with the music industry.
Speaker 5.
I sometimes quote some obscure philosopher when I want to impress at parties. But the 2 people who single-handedly stopped me from despairing of the human race are Tanya and Jeremy, whom I may add, I've known since nursery school. My first recollection of them, actually, is the two of them feeding their lunch to the birds on a day it had snowed, because they feared the poor creatures wouldn't be able to fend for themselves. 30 years later, they run one of the most ambitious food bank projects, collecting unwanted food from restaurants and supermarkets to distribute to the homeless or young families in need. Their unflinching dedication and commitment have somehow rounded the sharp edges of the worldview of such a dyed-in-the-wool cynic as I think myself to be.